Hi, Javier. Thank you so much for joining our podcast. I would like to start the conversation by understanding your professional background and what led to the creation of Pauling.AI.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Navin. Well, my background is in computer science, right? So I studied computer science and mathematics, and then went to work for Microsoft. I spent a couple of years there, and then worked at Google for about 16 years, which was quite some time. I joined Google in 2008 when it was a much smaller company than it is now, and I was there up until last year. And most of my time was working as an engineer. And then up until my last position, I was a technical director, and I was working with life sciences companies. And around that time, I started to realize that there were quite a few needs in the market. I was looking at how biotechs are doing things, and I realized that we could use technology in a more efficient way to help biotech companies create new medicines. So I left Google. I then founded Pauling.AI, found a few other folks that were interested in the same mission. And then we've been working for about a year building an AI agent that automates many of the tasks of computational chemistry and early stage drug discovery. So we are now basically launching our product. We put it in front of a few customers this month, late last month. We're kind of, slowly ramping up, slowly growing, basically building a tool that helps scientists create new medicines, which I think is a really worthwhile mission.
Wonderful. Javier, thank you so much for that introduction. Javier, when I went to your website, it mentioned something about Pauling principle. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as you know, I think podcasts are great. They're a very nice way to connect with people and to have interesting conversations. So a few months ago, I decided to create a new podcast as well, which is called the Pauling Principle. It's named same as the company. It's named after Linus Pauling, which is arguably one of the most celebrated scientists, definitely one of the most celebrated American scientists and chemists in history. And I basically just have conversations with people that I find interesting, scientists and other folks that are in the drug discovery field, as well as other people that I know from the AI field. So kind of trying to find the intersection between artificial intelligence and biotech and drug discovery. And I love it. I really enjoy having these types of conversations. And hopefully, the people that listen to my podcast and to your podcast will enjoy it as well.
Absolutely. It's a great way to understand what others are working on and what is happening around the industry. Can you tell me a bit about like who are you targeting? Who are you helping currently in the biotech and the life science space?
Yeah. So the biotech world is very peculiar in a way, right? So a lot of industries that we think of, have many thousands and thousands or millions of companies, right? So if you think about, hospitality, there are literally millions of hotels in the world. The biotech world is much smaller. The biotech and the pharmaceutical industry is much smaller in the sense of there are far fewer companies. I think one of the stats that people normally share is that there's like 5,000 biotech companies at any given point in the world. So that's basically 5,000 companies that are trying to discover new medicines. That is a very, very small number compared with a lot of other industries. The folks that we are targeting, the folks that would be our ideal customers are early stage biotech companies that are trying to find novel molecules for their therapies. Typically, when a new biotech starts, or when a group of scientists, gets together from a university and decides, okay, let's, we found maybe some novel science which we think may cure some disease, and they decide, okay, let's create a company. They typically have to do one of two things. They have to raise a lot of money and then go and hire a team, do all the work that is required for kind of finding an ideal molecule. And then, they go and they start doing all the testing, or they raise a lot of money and then hire what is called a CRO, which is a research organization that does essentially the same computational chemistry or other types of experiments and simulations in the computer to help them find those molecules. And that's kind of the first stage of biotech. And then they move on to studies in animals. And then eventually, if all those work well, they move on to what is called clinical trials, which are studies in human people. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make that very first stage of drug discovery much, much easier and faster and cheaper. What we have built is an agent that automates much of that work so that when a scientist is starting, instead of having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring a CRO or have to hire a whole group of people to manage all this, to do all this work, they can use our platform and then that gets them started much faster. Hopefully, that's a job that is just of as high of a quality as if they had a team of humans doing it. And much, much cheaper, right? So we're trying to compete in terms of equal or higher quality, but a much cheaper cost and much, much faster.
That's very interesting. And as you were explaining, I got reminded of COVID pandemic. How have things changed post COVID, and how would Pauling, a company like Pauling.AI, help, biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies plan in advance?
Yeah. That was actually a very interesting time because normally it takes many, many years to develop any kind of new medicine, even a vaccine, for example, right? Like different companies have been creating vaccines for many decades. There's a lot that is already understood about vaccines, but in spite of that, it may take many, many years to come up with a vaccine. And I think during COVID, we saw this really interesting thing that there was a company which was Moderna, and I guess separately BioNTech. But Moderna had been developing a technology which was essentially mRNA sequences inside of lipid nanoparticles. And I don't think they had any approved drug at the time. But then when COVID happened, the idea of using their technology to come up with a vaccine, with a vaccine that was very different than traditional vaccines, kind of worked out really well. And that's how I think the pharmaceutical world went from, here's a brand new disease to a vaccine that was essentially approved for emergency or under emergency reasons within about a year, which is pretty much unheard of, right? Typically, most drugs would take 10, 12, 15 years to get approved. Then, even things like, the flu vaccine, for example, right? Like there's a new one every year, and, some years is better than others, right? But even when it's essentially a new pharmaceutical product, it still requires a lot of time and effort. So that was one thing that was very, very interesting, right? Was the right time for them to come up with this vaccine. The other thing that was very interesting is that at the time, we thought that biotech was going to be a very large sector, that there would be a lot more investments, a lot more, money, being put into it. And for a year or a couple of years, that was true. That has reverted a little bit, right? So the biotech world kind of went through a phase where investment was going up and then it kind of, went down. And now it's actually very, very bad, which is sad for other reasons, right? Like there's not a lot of investment being put into it, which means 5 years from now, we're not going to have as many new medicines as we could and that is a little bit unfortunate. And in many ways, that was also correlated with COVID, right? Like because everybody was talking about COVID, right? Like and people were spending lots of money in some of these companies. That has reverted, unfortunately, but we'll see. In many ways, I think it kind of acts like a pendulum, right? It kind of swings from one side to the other continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. As you are into AI and we have seen technology and AI advancements, how do you see in the next 3, 4, or 5 years how AI and tech advancements going to change life science and pharmaceutical and biotech industry?
Yes, I don't think anybody really knows, right? That's kind of the problem with a lot of really fast moving technologies. I mean, we can all speculate about what's going to happen or not, but I don't think any of us really knows. In my mind, there are a few things that are probably going to happen. So language models, for example, are going to continue getting better, right? We've seen how they continuously got better over the past 3 years or so. They're probably going to continue getting better over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think we've seen also how people are trying to automate more and more of the tasks that can be automated in a computer, right? So there's been a lot of talk about automating marketing tasks and automating customer service, for example. I think that is probably going to continue. In a lot of countries, there is pressure, for salaries are rising, inflation is picking up and so on and so forth. So I think companies in general would be reticent to hire large numbers of people, which means they're going to try to automate, they're going to try to use technology. I think the other thing that we're seeing is that these systems are getting better and better integrated into other infrastructure. So 3 years ago, if you were using, ChatGPT, for example, right, maybe the most popular language model today, you had to go and type something and then copy and paste and so on. And now you can have it connect with your, Gmail inbox, for example. You can have it connect with your Google Drive spreadsheet. So that's probably going to continue, right? A lot of it is basically just building more and more integrations. And then maybe in a few years, you will have language models that can read your email, automatically answer, you send a text message, and then go and create a spreadsheet for you, and then, and so on and so forth, right? So I think the systems are going to get more and more useful for real world tasks. And then maybe the other thing that is most important, which is kind of the same thing that we're trying to build at Pauling, is creating systems that have some agentic behavior, meaning they have they can perform complex actions and sequences of actions on their own without supervision in order to complete a mission. So if you think about a language model, typically you give it some instruction and it gives you back some result, right? So you ask it, well, how do I, install this tool? And it gives you back a set of instructions. Whereas an agent can perform more complicated things. So you could tell the agent, hey, I want to record a video on my computer with instructions about a specific process, and I want to send it to somebody. And instead of having to figure out, well, how do I install a tool? Which tool do I install? How do I set it up? How do I save the video? And so on and so forth. The agent may just do everything on its own. It may download a tool, install it, set it up, help you record the video, tell you, hey, start speaking now, and then save that video, upload it to a Google Drive, and then share it with
Yeah,
somebody else entirely on its own. So I think um, that's still a little bit hard to do because the models are not smart enough to understand all the constraints that they have, all the possible errors and so on, but it's going to get better. So when you combine all those different things, I think that the overall theme is that AI is going to be more and more useful and more encompassing, which, of course, it has its benefits, right? For a lot of people, it may have problems as well that we'll have to solve along the way. But yeah, I mean, I would say those are the things that we kind of probably know more or less for sure, right? But apart from that, I think it's, lots of things are still up in the air.
absolutely. Javier, that's interesting because I would like to understand you are building a AI tech as well as into biotech and life science industry. What is the biggest challenge of growing and scaling such an industry?
I would say the main problem in biotechnology research is that even when you do everything right, biology is very, very complicated. So things just don't work. So you can create computer simulations that try to predict the behavior of molecules or cells in many different ways, different types of conditions. You can run things over and over and over, trying to cover many different things. But at the end of the day, the biology is just so complicated that when you try things in real life, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So that's part of the problem with, which causes the fact that drugs take so many years to get done, right? Because people have to try many different things. They have to spend a lot of money. They have to go back to the drawing board and try again, and so on and so forth. And it's also part of the reason why things are so expensive, right? I think a lot of people, you know, associate finding new medicines with the cost of the actual medicine, right? Or like the pill, right? The pill or the drug is just the end product of a very long, very hard, very expensive process, right? So finding the exact molecule, right, is what costs $1 billion, right? But then manufacturing that molecule may cost nothing, right? It's like, a cent per pill, right? So when you think about it, you can't really think it in terms of, well, the product is very cheap, right? Like the problem is that the process to manufacture that is very, very expensive. In a way, it's a little bit like, like a movie, right? Going to Hollywood and filming a movie, may cost $300 million, right? Once you have that movie, copying the movie is free, right? You watch it online, right? And you're streaming on Netflix or whatever, that costs zero. The problem is making the movie is what costs, so much money. So it's the same thing with drugs, right? And the reason people sometimes have to pay, thousands and thousands of dollars for a drug is because the making of that drug was incredibly expensive. So the main problem in biotech is that it is a very hard and expensive process because the complexity is just so high. And I think this is a nice opportunity for artificial intelligence to come into play because some of these AI tools can help us cope with the complexity and try to understand when things are likely to fail, maybe suggest new ideas that we may not have thought of, and especially kind of test or try to validate those ideas in ways that would require a lot of work or a lot of effort if it was humans doing it. So in my mind, the biggest promise is that using a lot of these AI tools extensively, we may take a process that typically succeeds in like 1%, 2%, 3% of cases and increase the probability of success to 5, 10, 15%. And the end result of that, I think, would be very, very positive, which is that we would have a lot more medicines for a lot more diseases that people suffer.
Absolutely. And what is your vision for Pauling AI? Where do you see it take from 5 years to 10 years? Where do you see Pauling.AI?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't really know, right? Like this is one of those things that I mean, it's really hard to say. If I had a magic wand, I'd love to help many, many, dozens, hundreds of scientists, find new medicines and hopefully be an integral part of how to discover new drugs. Or maybe at some point, contribute to discover new drugs ourselves, raise more money, grow the team, all the things that make startups successful, right?
Well, good luck with that. Javier, one,
Thank you.
one final question. What is that one piece of advice that changed your perspective towards how you do business and even at some extent to your personal life?
I would say most of my career was as part of a big company. And in a big company, there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of people moving in the same direction, right? So, sometimes things will go better or worse, right? But the company keeps moving at a good speed, right? Like it doesn't, just because you take a vacation, the business is not going to stop. That's definitely the case, at Google, right? Like, 1,000 people could go on vacation on the same day, right? And Google will keep making money. But in a startup or a small company, it's definitely not the case, right? Like individual impact matters much, much more. Um, the company doesn't necessarily move forward at a fast speed naturally, right? So a lot of it comes down to the impetus and the energy of the founders. And and sometimes it can feel like you're just banging your head against the wall, right? You're just trying one thing and then another, and sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, right? A lot of startups they don't make it. So I would say my best piece of advice would be to just keep going, right? In a job, normally you don't have to remind yourself to keep going, right? But in a startup, it is so so important, right? Because there's just going to be the wind is in your face, right? There's just going to be one problem after another after another. So you kind of have to keep reminding yourself, you have to keep going, right? Until you achieve your mission.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Javier. Thank you so much for joining our podcast, joining our channel today. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Navin. It was my pleasure.